This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. This is a special edition episode of the podcast, and I'm incredibly excited to do it. It's the first time I've gone out on the road since the pandemic shut down. We're in San Antonio, Texas, and we are here with Marcus Baskerville, the co-founder of Weathered Souls Brewing and head brewer, and also the creator of the Black is Beautiful project. Welcome to the podcast, Marcus.
Oh, thank you for having me. And thank you for coming down.
You know, it's been a nerve-wracking one for me because this, again, it's the first time that I've traveled, first time I left the state of Colorado, since the pandemic. We've been watching vaccinations happen and are watching, states get careful about masking, and we've been trying to stay socially distant and keep masked all day. But I appreciate you just recorded a class with us on brewing stouts for our online education program, and the folks that are all access subscribers will gain access to that once we get it edited and posted. So appreciate it. But I think on that note, we should talk about some stouts today. Obviously, it's something that's right in your wheelhouse and something that you're pretty excited about. And so I can't wait to talk about that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's dive in.
With the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. New this year, redundancy meets efficiency. G&D's micro-channel condensers are built with an all-aluminum construction, which eliminates galvanic corrosion. Using half the refrigerant of conventional condensers with fewer brazed connections translates to a lower GWP and less opportunity for leaks. Call G&D Chillers today to discuss your project or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. This episode is also brought to you by Crisp Scottish Pale Ale Malt. Crisp Scottish Pale Ale Malt is a workhorse of many a brewery and is at home in a variety of beer styles. Crisp sources the lowest nitrogen spring barley from farmers in Fife up to Moray during malting high cast moistures, and a balance of optimal germination time and temperature results in an even, well-modified malt with a rich color and balanced sweet malt flavor, which is ideally suited to ale brewing. Visit bsgcraftbrewing.com for more information on Crisp Scottish Pale Ale Malt, or call 1-800-374-2739. So Marcus, let's talk about you first. As we normally kick off the podcast, we talk about your background and how you got where you are today. So walk me through that history as a home brewer and then your entree into professional brewing.
Yeah. So like many, so obviously started out with the whole home brewing thing before the professional aspect. For me, I used to not be that great of a beer fan. I used to actually be more so into liquor. So especially in my early 20s, 20, 21, 22, it was more so like Ciroc, Hennessy, that type of stuff. My brother, we have a relative that lived in Southern California, and some of his actual friends introduced him to like Sierra Nevada Pale Ales and some of the basic stones and Firestones and stuff like that. So eventually that trickled down to me from my brother that basically got me into drinking a little beer here and there, trying to expand out from the everyday stuff that we normally didn't drink. Being from Sacramento, Sacramento had a pretty good beer scene as well. But even then, early on, back then, we had a Pyramid Brewery there. You had a couple other little options. We used to go to this pizza spot who actually had their own house beers, but to find out later, they were contracted by Firestone. So, even then, we were drinking good beer back then. So got into drinking beer first. And so it was one of those things where we started visiting breweries and getting to know different brewers and stuff like that. And my brother had got a Mr. Beer kit for Christmas from my sister. And so it was one of those things where the beer came out horrible. Couldn't drink it,
Right.
Dumped the whole thing. Everybody knows about those Mr. Beer kits, right? So being said that, me and my brother are very competitive towards one another. So from cooking, beer, whatever the case may be, my brother's 7 years my elder. So, and I'm the middle child. So, you kind of have that chip on your shoulder because have so much competitiveness between your older and then the younger sibling, especially my sister. She's in the process of getting her doctorate right now. So all of us Baskervilles are doing pretty well. So it was one of those things like, hey, no, I could brew a better beer than you. But our first couple of beers, we actually went ahead and did together. We started off pretty much our first beer was a Hop Slam clone.
Okay.
So we actually did all grain, no extract or anything like that. We came up with our own hop bill, tried to write our own recipe, being a little too aggressive to start out, right? So beer came out horrible. Something you really couldn't drink, right? Then we tried again. That beer was a little more palatable, but even then wasn't that great. I ended up taking a promotion for my job. At the time I was working for Citibank doing fraud prevention, and I took a opportunity to come to San Antonio to do training. I had never been out of Sacramento as far as the living thing goes. I wasn't tied down to anything at the time. So I was like, you know what? New city, something different, and I'll make more. Why not? Right?
Sure.
So I moved out here. Didn't start home brewing right away. Waited a little bit, but within the second week of being here, I actually got in a car accident and didn't have a car for a short time. So I took the extra money that I ended up getting from the insurance company and I upgraded my home brewing equipment.
Totally sensible move.
Right? I mean, I was 5 minutes from my job, so it's not really like I had anywhere to go. A couple coworkers were taking me to the grocery store and stuff like that. I didn't know anybody at the time, so it's not like I really had any place to be. So I was like, you know what? We're going to upgrade our equipment and I'm going to start trying to perfect this craft. So fast forward, first couple of beers came out horrible. I actually almost stopped brewing at one point, but my girlfriend, wife at the time, or wife now, girlfriend at the time, she actually bought me my first kettle, and she was like, you spent all that money on brewing, you better not give up, yada, 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 keep at it. So I actually started listening to a lot of podcasts and reading a lot. So guess what magazine I used to read quite a bit?
What was that?
Craft Beer and Brewing.
Man.
Right? And then also listening to a lot of the Brewing Network. A lot of that. I basically went from episode 1 and just sat at work and just started listening to every episode throughout the day. A Brew Strong and a couple of the other ones. So that really gave me a basis for what I needed to know at that point. So now it was just execution. So beer started to get a little bit better at that point, started to become palatable, stuff that you can drink, even some stuff I started to share. In 2013, I had the pleasure of listening to Annie Johnson's podcast on the Brewing Network when she won 2013 Home Brewer of the Year.
Sure.
So that was a big deal for me because you look, and we're from Sacramento, and this is a Black woman. So now I have somebody that looks like me and from the same area as me that just reached the pinnacle of home brewing. And so for that really motivated me, even to the point to where I even implemented some of the brewing philosophies that she talked about. I mean, just like not drinking during brewing. So even at a homebrew level, I stopped drinking, wouldn't have a beer until the yeast was pitched, that type of thing.
Sure.
And then I actually made my first good beer, which was a robust porter. And that robust porter is actually on tap now as our Roundabout Midnight, which was one of our core beers. So that was one of the first recipes that I perfected early on.
That's
so
great. We've been Annie's been writing for us as of late, and so it's fun to hear.
Annie is one of my favorite people. Yeah. She calls herself my aunt.
Oh,
yeah. So, being said that, beer started coming out okay, a little more palatable, drinkable, and so I started bringing beer to local bars, restaurants, tap rooms, different things like that, to start getting feedback. At that point, I knew that I cared about beer. And I knew that I wanted to make beer, the rest of my life. But at that point, I don't think I was I want to open a brewery level, right? This is just, I'm having fun home brewing. Like, I'm enjoying the beer that I'm making. Some of this beer is as good as some of the stuff that I'm getting on tap elsewhere. So, hey, like, I've satisfied one of my habits now. Like I could just, brew beer. So started doing that until I started bringing beers to these different places and people were enjoying the product that I was bringing in. A local brewery ended up having a tap takeover, and I had 4 to 5 beers on tap, and all of those beers ended up tapping out that night. They ended up offering me an assistant brewer job after that. So I still worked full time as a fraud manager for Citibank, working about 50 to 60 hours a week. But then I took on a quote unquote part-time job. I say quote unquote part-time because
Right.
they had me working about 36 to 38 hours a week starting out. It was one of those experiences
For next to nothing, I'm sure, too.
Oh yeah. Next, especially what I was already making. So I think it was like, it would get to the point to where I would literally not even cash the checks for like months on end, and then they would have to remind me like, "Hey, you didn't cash your check," and I'm like, "Oh yeah," like
It was that meaningless an amount of money that,
I'm like, "Oh okay, I guess that'll be a couple of extra groceries this week." But even then, I kind of grew tired of working there. At that point, I really enjoyed creating my own beer. I really enjoyed being creative, period. Back then I was already making, orange creamsicles and adjunct stouts. I'd even dived into barrel aging at that point. I kind of just dove head first in. And so at that point, I grew very unhappy. I worked there for a year, literally a year, and I couldn't take it anymore. They wouldn't let you experiment or, do anything on your own or have any type of fun or anything like that. Me and the owner ended up getting in a little tit for tat. And so it was either I was going to fight the owner in the parking lot or I was going to quit. So I ended up quitting. Upon quitting, Mike, my current business partner, he was actually invested in the brewery that we was previously working for. And me and Mike had became friends over the course of that year, just going out, drinking different little beers at like local bars and stuff like that. And I used to let Mike try a lot of my home brews and that thing. And so about a week after I ended up quitting, we were out having a drink, and I looked at Mike and I was like, when are we going to open a brewery? And he looked at me in the eyes and said, I've been waiting for you to ask me that. And we started working on the business plan literally like 2-3 days later.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So, here we are 4 years later with the brewery. And so, like a lot of individuals, it's crazy that I could say that story because a lot of individuals don't get into the beer scene that easily or have the opportunity to open a brewery.
But it's not that easy,
No.
And it sounds easy, but putting yourself in a position where you make the connections and you work for next to nothing for a year or more after having put in the work in, that's not nothing. Like, it's
when
putting
you put it like that, yeah,
right. But it's this. I hear the same story. When I talked to Matt Tarpey of the Veil,
Mhm.
it's a similar story. I went and swept floors, and then they let me brew, and then I was able to learn, and then and so you did a lot of shit work for a while. And, but you got to learn in the process and you didn't make anything.
Yeah.
And Mike Hunsacker of Grains of Wrath, it's the same story. Like, I worked for this brewery, got in a fight with the owner, ultimately left, had to go do something but it's that learning process where you put yourself in the right situation, knowing that you had a different long-term goal, and you ended up getting there because you made an incidental connection that turned out to be a more, important connection for you. And that's a common business, result. It's not accidental. It's just it's a result of some intention, even if it's not expressed in that kind of way. Yeah. We'll talk a little more. I want to get into Weathered Souls and your approach to brewing here. But first, a brewery might have 99 problems, but your fruit supplier shouldn't be one. Old Orchard is already known for their quality concentrates, but they also pride themselves on consistent product and reliable supply. When brewers need assistance, Old Orchard is just an email, phone call, or even a text away. Based in Greater Grand Rapids, Michigan, better known as Beer City, USA, Old Orchard is core to the brewing community. To join their fruit family, learn more at www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, for years, BreweryDB has been the industry's only professionally curated source of brewery and beer information and responsible for mapping millions of visits to breweries all across the United States. In early 2021, BreweryDB will reveal a whole new platform with all new marketing features for breweries to attract craft lovers to their unique brewery experience. To take full advantage of the enhanced marketing power of BreweryDB, And to increase your taproom traffic, visit marketmybrewery.com. That's marketmybrewery.com. It's easy and it's free. So you decide to launch Weathered Souls. It's not like there's a lack of breweries in general. And, even 4 years ago, there were some, decently named breweries that people knew in San Antonio. As you decided to carve out a space, for yourself in the world of brewing down here in Texas and San Antonio, what was the kind of, was there a guiding directive? Was there a kind of core set of principles? What'd you organize around?
So looking at what the beer scene was before us opening, I want to say there was about 8 breweries in the city. Biggest name brewery-wise probably would have been Freetail at the time. Being said that, most of the beers within the city were pretty traditional in the sense. There wasn't a lot of beer that kind of expanded on some of the newer styles, not a lot of adjunct beers or the fun beers, the typical stuff that you see now. Nothing wrong with that, right? But being said that, also being a huge IPA guy, a huge stout guy, I literally was miserable in San Antonio. There wasn't any traditional West Coast IPAs. We were the first brewery in San Antonio to do hazy IPAs. Outside of La Muerta, which is a smoked stout, there wasn't a lot of big body or barrel aged stouts or anything like that. For me, when it comes to that whole smoke thing, and everybody doesn't feel this way, but anything that has any lingering smoke in it tastes like barbecue pit for me. So
what's wrong with that? We're in Texas. Everybody loves barbecue down here.
Not in my beer. So being said that, I really wanted to love La Muerta. The balance of the beer is fantastic. The body of the beer, the adjuncts they do, I just can't get over the smoke flavor. So for me personally, I can't drink it. So being said that, we realized that there was already a gap within the beer scene here in San Antonio. So as a home brewer, I was already doing adjunct stouts, barrel aged stouts, some of the.
Because you're a little bit of a beer geek and a little bit of a beer trader too, also.
Exactly.
Right.
I trade beer. I've been drinking beer for I'm 36 now, so 14 years. And being especially from Northern California, I would say the second beer mecca behind San Diego. I was pretty well versed in what I like, I want to drink, what I think customers will want to drink. So basically I hit the ground running with those styles. We came out with the adjunct stouts. I think our grand opening, we had a barrel aged raspberry stout. We had a barrel aged tequila stout. We did a stout with cinnamon, marshmallows, vanilla, and something else starting out. But even then, we had 2 different hazy IPAs. We were the first hazies within San Antonio. We were right there starting around the hazy scene when Pint House did. I couldn't tell you who actually brewed one first, but our beers came out around the same time. So being said that, we got onto the haze craze kind of early and different things like that. And that's what our customer base kind of gravitated towards, because it was something brand new to the city, something they never had before, something that they would normally have to trade for to be able to get these type of beers. And we came out the scene running with it. So we already knew that there was pretty much a gap kind of head on as far as what the translation of beers being brewed and what consumers wanted at that point. You look at some of the beer places that you go to, like Flying Saucer and stuff like that. And I remember when Firestone came to town and they had 3 or 4 different barrel aged beers, and that place was packed. It was packed. And so you see the ability to be able to do that with those different type of styles. It kind of, led us in that direction to be able to start doing some of that stuff. But then even outside of that, our highest selling beer is a West Coast IPA. Outside of that in restaurants as well is Dale, our Mexican lager. So, we still keep those traditional style beers that the city originally is what they're used to. But we brought something brand new to the city. We were the first ones to start doing collabs, bringing hype breweries out here, quote unquote hype breweries,
Right.
and different things like that. And those breweries that people were trading, multiple beers for and different things like that to be able to get, and then bring these breweries here and have those collaborations. That was kind of something that kind of set us ahead of some of our other peers around town.
Sure. No, I was just trying to check my beer history, and I think the first time I had some Weathered Souls was 2019.
Okay.
And it was a beer nerd, beer trader friend of mine that's in one of those beer groups, and it was like just invited me over. We had some beers and wanted to share these things with me, and so it was interesting to see your connection into that kind of tier of beer nerd world, which is its own kind of subset of the beer market, and an interesting one because certainly on that kind of bleeding edge. So you came into it with stouts. You enjoyed doing that kind of thing. Let's talk about some stout brewing. You mentioned that you don't love smoked flavors in your stouts, and that's certainly a piece that's pretty core to a lot of stouts. When you started thinking about the stouts that you wanted to brew, what becomes that kind of ingredient foundation, for those stouts that you make, particularly in the imperial? Let's talk about the imperial stout realm. So
dealing with imperial stouts, I knew there's a couple of things that I don't typically like in what I drink in a stout. So looking at like the higher ABV imperial stouts, I don't like over bitterness, which you're going to get in some styles, which is fine. But typically for what I want to consume, I'm not going to include that. Another thing,
I think is great, by the way. We talked to a lot of, brewers have different philosophies on these kinds of things. There are those brewers that want to make some paragon of style example that matches up to either some other brewery that has made it or a style guide or some other model for it. But I also love brewers that know where that is and want to drink something else, and can clearly define how what they think is possible and good, and define that as separate from what this other thing is. And I think it's a great approach to want to make beer because you want these things to taste a certain way, and not just want to make it so that it tastes exactly like everyone else's out there.
Oh, definitely. I think being a beer fan definitely helps, and being somebody that I guess went through that whole phase of having to drink the rare stuff and, trading for beer and different things like that. It kind of, I won't say educate your palate, but it kind of helps you along the way as far as what is popular, what's going to sell, what people want to drink and that type of thing. So for me, like another thing, like I said, no smoke. So typically we're going to limit the amount of black barley or roasted barley that's in our beer. Something else that we're going to do is use debittered black malt instead of black malt. We've used Carafa 3 a couple of times, but to me that basically is just the black dye. Like there's no real like flavor profile to it. The black malt, debittered black malt, does attribute some of those stout qualities. I mean, it does give you a tiny bit of roasted character to the beer. You can get a little bit of that coffee aspect to it, and so that's why I enjoy using that. But something that we've been getting into lately is playing with the different chocolate malts. So I mean, you have the 3 variations, right? You got the pale chocolate, you got chocolate, and then dark chocolate. So something that I've been trying to do as of recently is play with those different malts in different quantities to produce different chocolate or, flavor aspects within that stout range. So for us, for instance, we use about 8%, about 8% chocolate malt within, one of our bigger beers. And I've even started using anywhere from 2, like splitting it. So 5% would be base chocolate malt, and then like another 2-3% would be dark chocolate malt. And you'll get those different attributes and accents from those different malt bills depending on how you utilize them. So that's kind of something that we've been playing with
from
lately.
A sensory perspective, how do you describe the kind of flavor differences that come, when you tilt it, towards the darker chocolate versus the pale chocolate?
Yeah. So for me, like, to kind of give a comparison, if you're using like the pale chocolate, like regular chocolate malts within your beer, and you're using those, within a decent amount of range, that's going to give you like your like Hershey's chocolate vibe, right? You're like kind of that milk chocolate taste, the lighter spectrum. You blend them and start using some of that darker chocolate, you actually get some of those deep dark cocoa notes. So I won't call it chocolate, more of that cocoa notes. Something that reminds you more of like that hot chocolate vibe, or even some dark chocolate that you might buy or something like that. So I've been gravitating more towards the dark chocolate realm, only because of the normalcy that we have with using sweeter ingredients. So it kind of balances out when you want to start going into adjuncts and stuff like that. But you know, it more so kind of depends on what the beer or the base is going to be used for. If we're just producing a non-adjunct beer, then I'm definitely going to use some of the darker chocolate notes, the deeper chocolate notes, because this is going to be a standalone beer and you want to have those type of characteristics on their own. If I'm doing a beer where I want the majority of the beer to be, you know, the adjuncts and then the base stout being the secondary flavor aspect, then I'm going to limit some of those attributes because I want the adjuncts to shine.
That's interesting, because I might have guessed exactly the opposite. You know, that if you're going sweet, you'd, you know, pump up some of those darker, you know, malt notes in order to counterbalance. But that's interesting that you are, when you go into that kind of sweeter adjunct style, you just go all in on that.
Yeah. So we try to tend to a lighter stout so that stout doesn't clash with those ingredients. We've done the deeper, darker attributes to beers with the sweeter ingredients. And to me, I mean, as a beer fan, I enjoy them because you get that stout up front. And for me, I would rather taste beer over adjuncts. But when it comes to the consumer base and you say that there's coconut, vanilla, and chocolate in the beer, that's exactly what they want to taste and not really the beer within itself.
Sure. No, we will maintain our never-ending mission to convince beer consumers that they should appreciate those beer-flavored beers.
Beer-flavored beers, right?
I mean, even in the barrel-aged imperial stout realm, those unadjuncted beer-flavored and spirits-flavored imperial stouts that you know, that kind of capture that, they're always my favorite beers. Obviously, when you see our top beers for any given year, they always lean towards the non-adjuncted or the simple, you know, adjuncted, you know, vanilla, just a coconut, just, you know, keep it so. So let's talk about midtones in, you know, because obviously with these big beers, especially with some of those darker, you know, more bitter notes, building those caramel midtones are pretty important. What do you use for those? Yeah,
so typically for our like midtones, caramel tones, is we use a blend of caramel malts. So typically I'll use, if I can find it, Crystal 150. But typically what we're able to find locally, because we use locally sourced ingredients, is usually Crystal 120, and then I accent it with Crystal 60. So the Crystal 120 is the heavier, like deep toffee characteristic, and Crystal 60 gives a nice little caramel tone. So to help attenuate those, also what we do kind of is almost as soon as we start transferring to kettle, we go ahead and kick on our jackets to kind of create some of that caramelization, bring out some of that melanoidin to come out, some of those deep dark characters that kind of attribute a little more when you get that early boil, early kind of, you don't want to burn it obviously, but you know, getting it a little hotter in there than what you would normally do with your transfer. We have had some noticeable differences as far as the like caramel, toffee, and those like mid-tones that you get to the beer.
What kind of percentages do those make up in a typical mash bill?
For ours, typically it's like around the 2% range, like 2-3%. We don't want to get too crazy with the crystals because we still want our beer to dry out.
Right.
Or at least finish, you know, on the lower spectrum.
Wait, you want it to dry out?
So, you know,
nobody likes dry stouts these days.
Dealing with our stouts, you know, we've done anything from 33 Play-Doh to I think our highest beer was 46 Play-Doh.
Oh man,
46, 47 Play-Doh. So even then, you know, you want your beers to round out. I mean, being that much that high of a starting gravity, you don't want your beer to finish out that high of a finishing gravity because it's going to be way too much residual sweetness. So typically for us, we try to limit the amount of specialty malts outside of our dark malts. I mean, you know, black malt, that's 10% is pretty high. But for us, again, we've been able to eliminate that overly bitter, overly roasted, overly smoky character with the bitter black malt we're using. So really using that much more so is to kind of contribute to the SRM. When I look at stouts, something that always deters me is looking at a brown stout, or those stouts that are like dark chocolate brown, but they're not black.
Right.
Like, I feel like if you're drinking a imperial stout, your imperial stout should be black as night. So for me, that's something that we try to get here by bumping up that black malt a little bit. So, you know, I mean, our first stout was called Cavernous. So being said that, I mean, that kind of, you know, gives name to what we were trying to achieve with that SRM.
When you pull open a bottle, or you hold up a bottle of the brewery Black Tuesday, and you can actually, if you pour it in a glass, you can see through around the edges. It's like, oh, okay, that's not what I expected.
Yeah, exactly.
Out of that. Not that it's bad beer, but you know, that's right. Current expectations and current trends for that are what they. Quickly on base malt, where do you find yourself going? It's obviously not the most important piece since you've got so many strong flavors in other areas.
So for us, we just use typical 2-row base malt. Nothing crazy, super neutral. It's going to hit our starting gravity. Helps the beer kind of finish clean, where you're not getting any additional flavor profiles outside of that particular base malt. I find that Morris is a little too bready for our stouts. Kind of gives like a little malt back tone sweetness that I don't really care for. And then outside of that, we haven't really played too much. I think I tried Golden Promise once, but kind of still settled on 2-row as the base malt that typically can achieve what we want, depending on what type of recipe we're trying to make.
Sure. Let's talk about body and heft. Before we do that, ABS Commercial is excited to be a part of today's podcast. ABS is a full brewery outfitter offering brew houses, tanks, keg washers, and small parts. As a part of ABS Commercial's ongoing Give Back campaign, they'll be giving away an ABS Keg Viking keg washer in June. So make sure to periodically check the ABS Commercial Facebook page to find out when the contest opens and how you can enter to win a Keg Viking. And as we keep talking about these beers, I'm getting thirstier and thirstier.
We're gonna try one.
Maybe we should try one.
Yeah, definitely. So we've done a couple of recent barrel aged stuff as we just had our anniversary in November. So we had some fun stuff. I did my first blend, which we could talk about, barrel aged blend and a couple of other things. But what we're going to open first is actually a member beer called Things Happen. So originally we had our first year membership. Their last beer was supposed to be a sour, and the sour didn't come out how I wanted to. It came out a little ropey, and it didn't end up being what I wanted, especially for the membership. So we dumped it. So to make up for the fact that they didn't get their sour, we ended up giving them an extra beer, which was called Things Happen. And this was a barrel-aged stout with vanilla beans and marshmallows. So this isn't one of our most viscous beers in the sense of mouthfeel, but still medium mouthfeel, nice vanilla notes on the nose, mouthfeel as well. And then it kind of finishes with that little kind of marshmallow sweetness. So
there's a little bit of vanilla in that.
Yeah, just a little bit. So for this beer, I want to say we used about 2.5 pounds per barrel of Madagascar vanilla beans. Then we used about 25 pounds of this for a 2-barrel batch, about 25 pounds of marshmallows. So, you know, something a little.
I want to talk to you about what marshmallows actually contribute, but let's talk about body first, since we're on that kind of malt spectrum right now. In terms of kind of promoting heft and weight, you know, obviously lactose is a big tool that a lot of brewers have in their toolbox. You've already mentioned that you really shoot for dry, you know, relatively dry finishing stouts or finishing gravities, you know, despite, you know, so keeping that kind of body into it without pushing a whole ton of sweetness. What is your solution around that?
Yeah, so typically what we do to help contribute to body is a few things. Obviously is the higher mash temps. So we're mashing at about 156 when it comes to our stouts. A lot of flaked oats. Depending on what base we're using, we could use anywhere up to 4% worth of flaked oats within the mash.
Yeah.
And then also those super long boils give nice contribution. So typically we do anywhere between a 6 to 8 hour boil just on our base stouts. If it's going into barrels, sometimes it's longer, anywhere up to 12 hours. So the idea behind that obviously is the evaporation that happens as you're boiling, which basically concentrates your wort more,
Right.
which ends up with more body. But what we also do,
But you're not pushing the 30-hour boils that Moxa or
no,
Weldworks.
I haven't done that yet. I'm supposed to go to Moxa in May, and I'm like,
back to Sacramento.
Yeah. Right? I try to go home every couple of months. Obviously COVID has kind of prevented that, especially with my parents in their 70s. So I've tried to limit my like traveling to their house and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, me and Derek at Mox have a pretty good relationship, so we're supposed to be revisiting a beer soon to go ahead and dry hop or go ahead and barrel age and that different type of thing. Probably brew with the homies at Claim Steak too on there, and yeah, like I try to keep a pretty good relationship with that home, you know, in case we ever want to open a second location or something like that. So outside of, you know, the boil and the temperature, something that we do add to our boils are maltodextrin. Maltodextrin is a non-fermentable sugar. I like it a lot more than lactose. One, it doesn't upset my stomach. But
you're lactose intolerant.
Yeah. Two, you get. It's not
that always trips me out because when I was talking to the folks from Angry Chair, you know, they were brewing with lactose back then. It was a couple of years ago now, and even though their head brewer was lactose intolerant, you know, and it's like, you know, he gave people what they wanted.
Yeah, we have a popular like sour series called creameries, and those all have lactose in them, like mimic that whole milkshake thing, which have been really popular here. And we always get people asking for them, but I brew them rarely at this point just because I don't like lactose. But we use maltodextrin. Maltodextrin can provide some residual sweetness to your beer. That's why we try to get the beer on the drier end of the spectrum as far as our finishing gravity, because we do add about 2% maltodextrin to the beer, because that is going to add some residual sweetness to it and help with the body. You got to kind of counteract that so you don't end up with something overly sweet.
Right.
But no, we've done up to our longest boil was 24 hours, which was like a double mash that we ended up doing. And that beer was so thick that it barely moved through our heat exchanger. So I haven't done that again. Typically I can get that viscosity that those 30-hour brewers are doing within probably 8 hours, depending on the base that we're using.
Sure. You know, and then from there, what's fermentation look like?
Yeah, so our
hops are pretty standard.
Hops are pretty standard. Our fermentation, we blast the hell out of our wort with O2 going into the tank, basically as much as we can almost push into there. So, you know, that's the fact we need your yeast to go to work. You're sitting at a gravity of 1140. Obviously, your yeast, depending on what yeast you're going to use, might have some trouble. For us, we use California Ale Yeast 001. That's been pretty tried and true for us to where we can hit those ranges that we need to as far as the finishing gravity goes. Typically not typically, but all the time we double pitch. I've even triple pitched once, depending on what the gravity is. So double pitching, you figure for a 20 barrel batch, we're probably using anywhere from 4 to 5 liters worth of yeast. Versus say, I was doing a West Coast IPA, then the 2 liters for a 20 barrel batch would be fine.
Are you buying fresh pitches or
yes.
are you?
So dealing with our stouts are always fresh pitches. I have done like second pitches where I've pulled yeast off of like IPA or something like that and gone ahead and pitched and had wonderful fermentation. But now would I transfer yeast from another stout to a stout? Probably not, because it's probably not going to finish out. At that point, your yeast has kind of been stressed out to that point. So typically we're going ahead and dumping. And then
you got to do the Matt Brynildson plan, and that's brew a whole lot of 805 so that you've got
all that extra yeast,
all
right?
that ale yeast donor right there. He was joking about that on the podcast. Like, it's the best yeast donor we don't have to.
Yeah, it's kind of like the same thing with malt grow. We usually get a decent amount of pitch after our blonde ale, which I guess that's 805 is a blonde.
See?
So that makes sense.
There you go.
Right. So, and then on top of that, going into the second day, we also oxygenate. So as soon as I come in the morning, I'm hooking up the oxygen tank and running.
Even on day two.
Even on day two. I mean, at that point,
you're not worried about.
No, your yeast hasn't produced enough for it to be any concern leading up into day two. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of popular stout producers that kind of do the same. That was actually something that I picked up from a popular Florida brewery. So being said that, that's something that we started doing here. And it's a noticeable difference as far as the fermentation time. Even before that, a couple of things kind of lagged, finishing up. That kind of helps provide that additional, food kind of for the yeast to be able to go through that whole large fermentation process. And then also what we do is through the course of that fermentation, go ahead and bump up the temperature. So we start fermentation around 66, 67. But then by the end of fermentation, it's probably finishing at 72. Just to kind of help that yeast rally up towards the end and finish out the way that we need it to.
So now you've got stouts. Let's talk a little bit about one of the kind of your specialty approach, which is what we're drinking now. Intensely flavored, additive. I shouldn't call it additive. That doesn't sound right. Beautiful ingredient, sculpted and crafted flavors. Built onto that kind of base layer of stout. And this one, obviously, you mentioned vanilla and marshmallow. Talk to me about how you go about adding those in order to. I mean, vanilla is an incredibly expensive ingredient.
Jesus, it is.
Yeah, I mean, just insane. Like, thankfully, come down a little bit in price.
Mm-hmm.
Not at its all-time highs now. But
shout out to Derek because he just gave me a new source for vanilla beans. It's going to save me a little bit of money for sure.
Well, good. I'm not. I want you to blow up your source and cause a run on that now. So we'll leave that one a secret for the time being.
Yeah.
But when it comes to adding vanilla, what's that look like for you?
So typically adding vanilla, if it's going to be the standalone ingredient, then we try to go heavy. If it's going to be accented with another ingredient, there's really no purpose to go heavy because then you're just wasting money. So for a typical beer where we want the vanilla to be the main highlight, like this beer, we're using about 2.5 pounds per barrel. But typically, I mean, a barrel, which is what our normal release is 55 gallons. So 2 barrels. I mean, we're using 5 pounds of vanilla beans. Excuse me. For us,
that's only what, like, $2,000 or so.
Something like
beans,
that. Yeah.
Right.
So
everybody can do that.
Yeah. So for us, we treat our vanilla beans, obviously go through the whole split the bean. Now, something that I've gotten tired of doing is sitting there, splitting 300-400 beans. So what I've been doing lately is using the Ninja, which I actually like a little bit more. So we've been basically adding our vanilla beans to the Ninja, blending them up until they're super coarse, and then soaking them in typical bourbon. Usually it's like a cheap bottle of McKenna or something like that. We let that sit for a couple of days, and then we go ahead and pitch the whole thing within the beer. At that point you've kind of created an extract, so you don't want to lose some of that flavor, getting rid of that bourbon. So we kind of throw the whole thing in to kind of attribute to some of those flavor profiles. Now, if we're doing something like, say, for instance, this would have been vanilla and coconut or something like that, then the vanilla aspect would have went down considerably, probably like 1/4 pound per barrel or so, where you can still get a decent amount of vanilla note out of it, but it's not anything that's overbearing or going to be costly for you.
Talk to me about marshmallow. Why add marshmallow? How on earth do you get marshmallow, this spongy material, to actually convey anything within the scope of a beer?
So I have a secret for my marshmallow, and I'm going to share it. just because we're on your podcast.
Oh my gosh.
But I really enjoy it. Now it's a pain to clean out of your kettle, but marshmallow powder.
Marshmallow powder.
Now,
is that related to the cream cheese powder that I keep hearing about?
This is
people
real.
Using?
This is real marshmallow powder. Like if you put it into liquid, it basically turns into one huge like marshmallow.
Okay.
And I got put onto that because our local grain distributor, Brewery Direct, they got run through a restaurant supply. So we have access to all of the fun pastry ingredients and different, like it's literally probably a 400-page catalog worth of additional ingredients that I can buy outside of like my typical brewing stuff. So one day I was searching, trying to find some things that you typically don't see. Like I still want to say that we're one of the first breweries to use chocolate ganache. I was like, chocolate ganache, like okay, it's frosting, but how many people do you know have actually used Belgian chocolate ganache? Now over the last couple of years I've seen a few breweries do it, but I don't want to say we're one of the first. But then outside of that, I was looking for other alternatives to marshmallow because we've done the whole marshmallow thing. We've done the whole fluff thing. Marshmallows, they don't ever really evaporate or anything like that. They stay whole, right?
Right,
So, I mean, you can contribute.
It's not like you can cut them up or anything. Just so you have greater, like grind them so you have more,
so
more
you get a little
area.
more, like you get some flavor out of using like actual marshmallows, but it's more like, to me, like that residual sweetness.
Right.
Now, dealing with marshmallow powder, that actually gives you that base of marshmallow flavor within your beer. So we add that in the boil. Typically for 15-barrel batch, usually 50 pounds is enough, one bag. But that's something that people might want to check out. Now, it's a pain in the bitch to clean out because, again, once it hits liquid, it's basically expanding to actual marshmallow.
Right.
But you do get some of it to boil out. Like, I guess I could probably try mixing some in some water and then adding it, mixing some in some water and then adding it, or adding a little bit at a time. But I don't always have the ability to, have a whole bunch of time to kind of focus on those type of things. So typically we add half of the bag in, wait a few minutes, and then add the other half of the bag. And I also add it at the beginning of the last hour so it can have that whole hour to try to evaporate as much of it as possible. I think I've even tried it at 2 hours. So, I mean, it contributes huge marshmallow character, but it also provides some body to the beer too, because in the sense it's almost like maltodextrin. I mean, except marshmallow powder, from what I've seen, has been able to kind of ferment out. But
it's just because of the simple sugar.
Yeah, because of the simple sugars that's in it. So I've been seeing it's been able to ferment out.
Adding it in the boil, though, now you're risking burn, like blowing off some of the aromatic elements of it, especially if you're giving it a longer time to boil. Yeah. You're saying that some of that still hangs out?
Yeah, some of it still hangs out. We actually just used a base with the marshmallow powder to put in our Buffalo Trace antique barrels that we just received a couple of weeks ago. So
Buffalo Trace antique collection barrels?
Yeah.
What's this about?
So actually, shout out to Derek again. He hooked me up with the connection to be able. So this year we ended up with a Pappy 23-year barrel, a Sazerac 18 barrel, Thomas H. Handy barrel, and then we ended up getting a 15-year Woodford Masters barrel. So not too bad.
Man.
I'm excited about that Pappy barrel. We probably won't even touch it for 2 years, but
it's a lot of pressure.
Pretty excited about it.
You got to put, whatever you put into it,
just based out, nothing else. Yeah. Like I would be so mad to put an adjunct like in that type of style. So I said, you know what, we'll deal with the base with the marshmallow powder. Over time, that marshmallow powder our marshmallow character will kind of die, but it'll leave like a nice little residual flavor for sure when that beer is actually ready.
I want somebody to make a stout in a Pappy Van Winkle barrel with a twist of lemon. The way that Julian Van Winkle III actually drinks his Pappy Van Winkle.
That would be kind of dope. I have heard that.
I read the book Pappyland from Wright Thompson over Thanksgiving, and got a big kick out of that. That our ideas about the purism of these things are actually, in the context of the family that makes them, treated completely differently. Which it's I think a great way for people for the geekier elements of our beer community to check themselves.
Yeah.
But so marshmallow and vanilla. Let's talk. Talk to me about some of the other fun ingredients that you enjoy.
So
pushing
probably
into
the one
stouts.
that we use the most and probably most famous for, which we're gonna try a beer, will probably be like,
You can talk me into it.
Would
Yeah.
probably be coconut. I think we do coconut really well. Dealing with our coconut, we do a couple of different things when it comes to the whole flavor profile from coconut. Like I've seen, some breweries put 5 or 6 different coconuts in it. Like this has
Like Horace?
coconut, yeah.
Yeah.
But outside of that,
Coconut water, desiccated
coconut
coconut,
candy,
all the things.
so
It's fun. It's a good story.
Yeah.
And the beers that I've had with that have been good. They've been really enjoyable beers to drink. Sure.
But if you can achieve those flavors with spending less money, then I'm all for it. So for
there's
me,
a bit of theater, to it
exactly.
that, that certainly helps sell the beer.
Yeah.
I don't know that it all helps make for an absolutely crucial or necessary flavor in the beer, but it is what it is.
Yeah, so for us, typically for coconut beers, we use 2 types of coconut. Desiccated coconut, which for me provides like that super round coconut, like Almond Joy type coconut flavor that you get in the like roundness of the beer.
So
like
desiccated, that is
flavor.
really just dried coconut.
Yeah, it's just dried like coconut powder, basically.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, we use toasted coconut. Typically, again, because we go through the bakery, we can get our coconut already toasted to us, that type of thing. I'll rerun it through the oven because we're fortunate enough to have a kitchen here, but I'll rerun it through the oven just to kind of make sure things are
right,
are
to not
ready
pick
to
up
go.
an errant culture.
Exactly. But outside of that, we'll do probably it's about 65% toasted to 35% desiccated to kind of get some of those round coconut flavors that we could attribute in the beer. I mean, you figure the toasted coconut's what's going to give you your like sweet coconut and that nose. And so I try to use...
It's so interesting that heating process really does bring out the sweeter element. Like raw coconut doesn't taste as sweet.
No, but even then, if you heat up desiccated and toast desiccated, it doesn't taste the same as if you were to use like those raw coconut flakes that you go ahead and toast. There's like a perceivable difference within them. So for us, we've kind of created that balance of using those 2 different coconuts. So what we're going to try now is our Whale Rider. This is one of the more popular releases that we just had come out for our anniversary. That has been doing pretty well in the secondary market. So I've been
pretty well in the secondary
market. Told,
that's something that brewers don't want to talk about very often. Or
they're a whole lie if they say that. So at the end of the day,
Marcus
like
is keeping it real here.
I don't obviously, somebody selling our beer, paying $40 for a beer and then selling it for $160 is one thing. But at the end of the day, I see that as free advertisement, right? So now somebody has created a beer that, you sold for $30 in the tap room and somebody is going around and trading bourbon for it and whatever the case may be. I mean, that's just bringing enticement to your beer, to your brewery. So I don't follow it. But again, I come from the world of craft beer. Like I still have friends that trade my beer even. So like one of my best friends owns a brewery in Hawaii and he just did this side by side with Bake a couple of weeks ago. So you still have those like people that get kind of excited with that whole type of trend and they kind of keep me informed. And I mean, you want your beer to do well. Obviously it's selling is one thing, but to see it garner that extra quote unquote hype and stuff like that, it makes brewers feel good. Don't let them lie to you any other way.
It's, it's all part of a feedback loop,
exactly.
And at the end of the day, it's not just about hype. The market is pretty good at figuring out for itself what quality is.
Exactly.
And, and if something is hyped, that hype can stand for a couple months.
Yeah.
And, and it's either really resonates with people or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then it falls flat.
Exactly.
And, you know, and so quality is quality. People, you know, it's almost like GameStop, you know, you can pump the market for a while,
Yeah.
and you can keep it up there.
Exactly.
But at some point, some fundamentals are going to come into play, and all of a sudden you go from $300 a share to 60, and then, you know, I mean, you're still at 60, which is better than the 13 that it was at before all of this run. But you know, you gotta, you know, you're not riding the same kind of highs.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so this beer.
So this beer is actually a blend of a few different barrels. So this past year, we've kind of, now that we've increased the quantity of barrels that we have, I've been getting a little bit into the whole like blending thing. So this particular barrel or blend is a Willet Rye barrel, I think a Heaven Hill barrel, and there's one more barrel involved that I cannot think of off the top of my head. But being said that, it was then hit with a ton of coconut, desiccated, toasted, and then this actually does have about 2 pounds of vanilla beans per barrel. This particular beer, like I said, normally we wouldn't use so much vanilla if we wanted something to kind of stand out. But with this one, I was really feeling myself and I wanted to be over the top. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to push as much coconut into this beer as I can. As you see, you got coconut floating in your glass, and
nice little sheen of oil across the top of it.
I'm gonna push as much vanilla, well, not too much vanilla, but enough vanilla where you're gonna be able to get that characteristic. And I want this beer, you know, to kind of shine. And
this beer is incredibly sweet, and I like it. You know, I do. Like you drink it, and it's like this is very sweet.
Yeah.
But this is a dessert beer.
This is probably the sweetest beer that we've done, for sure. But I mean,
so on a theoretical level, I want to dislike it, and then at a base human, like pure id level, like want more, must have more, you know. And, you know, and I think that's kind of an interesting interplay there. That, but it's not just sweet, you know, for sweet's sake. There are definitely multiple layered undertones there, and a caramel middle. Maybe, you know, not quite as many deep base notes, and, you know, kind of darker. You know, because I can withstand smoky and roasty notes and those kind of deeper coffee notes. I love that kind of thing as well. You know, but it's still balanced in its own, you know, unique kind of way.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna have to pour myself a little bit more.
Go ahead, help yourself. Yeah, this has actually been one of the more popular releases that we've had as of recently, along with the last beer we'll kind of try.
You know, it's such a funny thing. I do talk to, you know, I've talked to plenty of brewers in the past who have tried to map out or done the research on their own beers and looking at Untappd scores, triangulating those against finishing gravities. There's some strong correlations there. And, you know, and as much as you might want it to be different, especially in this kind of style, that the sweeter something is, the higher it tends to score. Right. And so for as much as brewers want to make, you know, beers for themselves that are dry and pristine and classic examples, or, you know, right down the middle, you know, it's hard to mess with that, especially in this kind of market where the audience for this is absolutely using Untappd. They're absolutely paying attention to what their friends are drinking. There's absolutely a social component to that, and a bit of that kind of peacocking element where they want that validation for their own aesthetic choices. They want their friends to see them doing this and think that they are cool and in the know and connected and all of those things, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. We do that in you know, regular life all the time, from the clothes we wear, you know, to the books that we read and everything else. You know, it's a way of conveying an image of yourself out there, you know, into the world. But I digress. Other ingredients, or is there anything in this? So let's talk. We started talking about blending, but we didn't really get too deep into it. Talk to me about some of the characteristics of different bourbon barrels and how that causes a little different expression within your barrel aged beers.
Yeah, so we've kind of been getting into the whole blending thing and experimenting with a lot of different, not a lot of different spirits, but a lot of different variations of barrels. Something that we've been getting into probably the last almost 2 years have been single barrels and barrel picks. I've become a huge bourbon fan over the last probably 2.5 to 3 years, like to the point where I think I had a bottle of Jack Daniels in my house. And now I have over 80 bottles. So, I mean, I've become a huge bourbon fan. And so
I feel you. I'm a recovering bourbon fanatic.
Okay.
I a year and a half, 2 years ago, I had 36 open bottles of bourbon. Like, I don't drink bourbon fast enough.
I think I probably have, out of the 80 something bottles, about 60 something of them are open. But, like I said, I'm still new to bourbon. So these are all bottles I've never had or anything like that. So I'm getting
completely feel you. That
open.
was the thing. Like, it was 2018. It's like, I should learn bourbon and understand that. And so I went deep into it and opened a whole bunch of bottles, and I needed to learn what I liked and how I was going to build my palate and what I appreciated about bourbon. And it was a wonderful learning experience. Expensive, but a wonderful learning experience.
My wife has started checking my bank account now, and now she knows. Like, before I was able to like sneak bottles in, now it's like, oh, where'd this new bottle come from? Or who did you get this from? That type of thing. But then even then, being a beer producer and making decent beer, a lot of people take care of you when it comes to that stuff. So I've had a lot of random people bring me just random bottles and different things like that. Like, hey, I thought you want to try this. So here's a bottle of this or something like that. Which when we're done, we'll try the first bottled and bond in Texas. I know you're a bourbon fan. Yeah. So I have one of those in the office. But outside of that, we've been I've been really trying to focus on our barrel program, trying to garner and get unique barrels that nobody else is able to get.
Let's talk about the flavors that those barrels provide. That's what I'm interested in is thinking about how when you sense the beer and how it comes out from some of these different barrels, what that range is. When I drink a Four Roses, I love that kind of spicy character, and that kind of fight that it has. And when I drink a William LaRue Weller, it's just that amazing polish and that bigness, that like wall of sound character, like a Grateful Dead show where it's perfectly produced with, every single speaker in the place finely tuned. And so that even at that high volume, you hear this kind of detail and get to experience it. When you think about the ways that some of these different barrels convey into beer, what some of that range look like? And are there some specific barrels that you find, or different producers even that create different expressions? Or is it producer based, or is it age based and not producer based? How do you think about that?
So it can kind of be a little bit of both, a little bit of producer and a little bit of age. For us, now that I've gotten into blending, I've been finding myself enjoying rye barrels a lot more, getting that contributed kind of that spiciness and, that little back hint of rye to the beer. I've been finding myself really enjoying lately. So just like the beer that you're drinking now, I want to say it's about 20-ish% rye within it, dealing with Willet barrels. Those are mostly kind of the barrels that we've been getting. But outside of that, as you know, like different bourbons attribute different flavor characteristics. So for me, I like kind of like what I like drinking personally. A lot of Elijah Craig, Buffalo Trace. Let's see, what's another major barrel? Getting into again some of these store picks. Like I have a 13-year Willet bourbon back there, 12-year Willet bourbon. I want to say I have a 20-year Willet bourbon back there. So you figure, I don't know what flavors those give yet, but I think over
we'll check in with you in a year or two when
over that course of time. You're gonna get those different contributes. With Elijah Craig is heavy on the caramel and the toffee, and that does play within that beer characteristics. It does come out within the beer over time. So then even then we've started aging our beer a lot longer. I think when we started barrel aging, we were barrel aging from like 8 to 10 months. Now I'm at the point to where some beers I won't even look at for 2 years. 18 months to 2 years, just because I've noticed that it's you're gaining other notes without this barrel that if you didn't let it sit as long, it wouldn't. But then also the other thing that we typically do here that I notice that helps with some of our barrel programs, like you'll have a few of our barrel aged beers and notice that none of them are hot. There's a couple of things that contribute to that.
That's definitely true. Yeah.
One of them is going to be the fact of the age that these beers are aging within that barrel. So a lot of that heat is kind of dying down over time. But then also something that I've noticed as far as aging my beers is the difference of aging them between when I actually recirc the barrel and add water, like hot water within the barrel, let it soak and then dump, versus just trying steam or adding beer directly straight into the barrel without rehydrating it first. And I don't know the science behind it, but I want to assume that hot water has something to do with, your staves opening up as it gets hot. And then you're adding that cold beer into that said barrel, and now that barrel is kind of contracting. As I've been getting into bourbon, I've been kind of learning a little bit more about bourbon barrels and how Kentucky or distilleries in Kentucky and different things like that go ahead and utilize their barrels. So I've been trying to implement some of that into the brewery. Now, I won't get into grave detail about that yet because it's something new that I'm working on. And I really think that it might change the way that some people barrel age. But I'm not there yet. And I want to actually do some real research and make sure that this is actually hitting on all cylinders of what I feel that it's going to before I do.
Sure.
So if you ever watched the bourbon documentary Neat on Netflix, that gave me an idea for a barrel aging program. So we're going to start testing that out. I already got my control barrel and the barrel that I'm working with to actually see if it contributes and makes a difference, but kind of see what happens. I have high hopes for it.
We'll have to have you back on the podcast and talk about that down the road. So there's one more beer that you wanted to kind of discuss as a way to get into talking about technique.
Yeah, definitely. So this last beer that we're going to drink is our anniversary blend. Our anniversary blend was a blend of 3 different barrels as well. This one was going to be a Willet 12-year bourbon, Willet 7-year rye, and then a 4-year Heaven Hill. So my thought process behind this was actually the 12-year Willet was the more viscous beer that we had in those barrels. It was a little on more of the residual sweetness. That was actually one of our 24-hour boil stouts. So dealing with those, I think it was like 42, 43 Plato. So it finished pretty high as far as the finishing gravity goes. So typically with those sweeter beers, we use them as like the middle ground for the beer, right? Kind of more for the body, but we use I have another drier stout base that we put into barrels as well. So we have 3 stout bases. I have Truth of Darkness, I have Cavernous, and then I just have our base stout. Cavernous is our more viscous, overly large imperial stout. Truth of Darkness was the one that you tried the base earlier, where it still has a decent body to it. Still and pretty
an interesting
viscous
spiciness that just comes out just from
a nice little mouthfeel and flavor characteristic to it,
right?
And then the other one kind of is more on the like thinner spectrum, but typically we can get more of that like bourbon character using the thinner stouts, which probably contribute to the less viscosity. You're pulling more out of the wood. So being said that, it was a blend of those. It went probably about, we'll say about 50, 30, 20 within the blend range. And so we were actually pretty happy about this one, and it ended up almost 15.5%. Nice viscosity, nice body. Does have a little residual sweetness on the back end, but not anything that's cloying or overbearing. This was really something that I think going forward we'll probably do about maybe once a year, doing this type of stout blend. And over the course of time, these barrels are going to get older. So for us, one barrel was 18 months, one barrel was 12 months, and one barrel was 9 months, I think. So when we do this next year, that barrel will be 2 years, and then the other one will be almost 2 years, well, actually over 2 years, and then The other one will be approaching that 1.5 year range. And so we hope to continue to kind of branch out more into that over the course of the next couple of years or so, depending on, how these different beers go and what we decide to add to them. But I also think that being, the single barrel aspect of it does put a play into it too, because now you're getting barrels that have contributes to other flavor characteristics that you normally wouldn't get from that, like say bourbon if you were to buy it on the shelf, right? So this 12-year Willet pick was specifically selected for whatever the taster had thought outside of the barrel picks that he already had. So I mean, in the long run, those are contributing to the beer in the long run as well.
There's such an interesting trade-off here, because when you swell barrels with hot water, then you are essentially washing off some of that bourbon character.
And that's what I thought, because you're also dumping out the char when you dump out the barrel and all of that type of stuff. And so that's what I normally thought too. But really, to me, it just kind of gets rid of some of that heat. I mean, the amount of time that we're leaving these beers in barrels anyways, you're going to get all of that flavor characteristic that you want over that course of that 1.5 to 2 years, regardless.
And maybe it's that character of the wood that was imbued in the spirit that was in it, and not just the actual spirit itself. But I think there's, I wonder if there's also some element of that swelled barrel having a little bit more imperviousness to oxygen ingress.
I think so too.
And, potentially also aiding that aging process, because it's not bringing it as much kind of micro-oxygenation. Mm-hmm. So this is the blend now.
Yeah, that's the blend.
And it's certainly not as sweet as the last beer we drank, but it still has that pleasing kind of character to it. It's not a sweetness that's out of line with something like port or dessert wine, which is, I think where all of these beers can comfortably be and should, and
that's true,
and shouldn't feel bad about being in that area, because I think that's a realistic and reasonable place for them, and it's a realistic consumption mode. I mean, with a lot of these beers, they're consumed, the way that they're consumed is not by a single consumer drinking a snifter of it or drinking an entire 22-ounce bottle of it. I mean, most of the consumption mode of this is smaller pours shared with a group of friends who are all beer fanatics, amidst a context of a lot of other beers. Like it or not, that is the context in which people drink these right now. Maybe not quite as much this past 20 or 12 months, just because COVID has screwed all of that up. But
COVID has been a pain in the bitch.
Oh, I hear. Yeah. But having something that it jumps out, that sweetness and that, the body that it ends up having with that and that kind of intensity makes something memorable in that kind of context. And, we can whinge about it all we want, but it is that current reality for those that want to kind of play in this space of the market. When you taste this, what do you taste?
Let's see here. This is the first bottle I've had since the anniversary. So right off the bat, I'm going to get dried fruit. So I get a lot of that like dried cherry taste, kind of almost even like a raspberry aspect to it. And then for me, that's what that lingering kind of sweetness is. And then it kind of melds back into that deep dark chocolate. And then it rounds out with a little bit of oak tannin, and then you're going to get a little bit of that bourbon on the back end, but it's still going to have a little bit of that back sweetness, residual sweetness on the back end too.
Maybe a little tobacco,
just a little bit
as it kind of finishes out. But the interesting thing is that it takes you on a journey, and and you go along for the ride on that, and it's interesting.
When I was crafting this beer, I was actually drinking at the time, what was I drinking? A Maman 2020 that Perennial had sent me. And so, in all honesty, I was like, I want to make my own fucking version of Maman.
It's not a bad goal to have. Not a bad goal at all.
Now, one of my beer friends brought me, this is COVID, right? So he opened a 2018 Maman, and he went brought me poured some in one of his like silk cups, brought it to me so I could do like an actual side by side. Now, mind you, this shit ain't nowhere compared to 2018 Mamon. I was like, that's not even fair to bring 2018 Mamon to this, because that's like literally like one of the best non-adjunct barrel-aged beers that you're ever gonna have. But I didn't
specifically
push
2018.
Specifically 2018, but I didn't push my glass to the side either after drinking the 2020. So
sure,
yeah,
I've still got a bottle of 20. I actually have a 2018, a 2019, and a 2020 Mamon.
Shit.
Back in
2018, that was special, but
all right. Well, now I got to go back and revisit it. Thanks.
Yeah. But it was more so trying to create, a nice non-adjunct barrel-aged stout that Texas could be proud of. That was the goal with trying to create this beer.
And that's a noble goal. Are there any other kind of distinct elements of your stout brewing program that we need to cover before we talk a little bit about Black is Beautiful and where it is right now?
No, I would say that's probably the majority of the kind of the philosophies that we use here and what we're trying to do stout-wise. But yeah, Black is Beautiful.
Well, I very deliberately wanted to talk to you about brewing first, because I know everybody wants to talk to you about Black is Beautiful, but we don't want to, not pay attention to that either. That's an important thing and an important cause to you, and has been a very significant, motivating thing, and an important cause for community and society as a whole. Talk to me about Black is Beautiful now, 6-7 months in to the program, and what it looks like now, and what it is meant to you to kind of also move along this Black is Beautiful journey.
So originally when I came up with Black is Beautiful, I think I told Mike, I was like, maybe we might get 250 breweries involved, right? And at the time, you're thinking that's a lot of breweries. I mean, 250 different individual breweries. I mean, you look at the industry that we're in, and like, let's be real. I mean, it's less than 1% Black ownership in the industry. But what I can say dealing with the industry is that, I mean, at the end of the day, everybody that's kind of guided me along my path of becoming the brewer that I am have been Caucasian, and they've been open arms with providing me with whatever resources I need, information, whatever the case may be to got me to this level. I can contribute to a few certain people that assisted me, like Jeffrey Stuffings, who you guys are going to go see later this week. That's a really good industry friend of mine. I mean, even going into when I originally was homebrewing, like, hey, if you ever need any information for this, come by. Here's my number, that type of thing. Then Mike Miraz, I don't know if you know Mike Miraz at all, at Miraz Brewing Company in El Dorado Hills, California. But he was a big avid home brewer, opened his own place, but he's garnered a whole bunch of, he's won GABF medals and a couple other things like that. But he was the first brewery to open his arms to me and my brother and cousin when we were home brewing, even before home brewing. Yeah. He came out with we used to have a beer group called Brothers and Beer. So even before Black is Beautiful, years ago when we were in home brewing, we've been about inclusion in beer. We noticed a long time ago going in the tap rooms, we'd be the only ones going into the tap room, or, bartenders would act a certain way when we went in, act like we don't know anything about beer. And it's like, in reality, I probably know more about beer than you, but, I kind of digress. But being said that,
if you're black or a woman,
you don't know anything about beer, right? You need all the instruction in the world. So
let me white mansplain that to you.
So being said that, we've had that support from early on, and kind of, was focused on inclusion early on. And so I remember the exact catalyst, the moment when I realized like I had to do something, and that's how prolific I think that moment meant to me. It like literally brought me to tears. So I'm in the car and I'm driving to Dallas to go brew with some friends at Turning Point, and I was listening to Breonna Taylor's mom talk on the Breakfast Club, and she was basically talking about the course of actions to her finding out that her daughter was murdered. Being the father of 2 young daughters, being a black male that's been through, discrimination, that's been through racial profiling, that's been through police brutality, it hit home. Like, that shit literally made me cry. And I don't really cry as a grown man. I think the last time I cried was when my daughter was born. The first one, not even the second one. So, being said that, like, it hit. And so on the way back, I was listening to just random radio stations, and it was a lot of the like protests going on and stuff like that. And it was one of those things like, well, what can I do to give back? Like, what can I do to contribute to this cause? Because we're in mass COVID right now. And again, up until Black and Beautiful, I was a huge introvert. So I wasn't going out to go participate in protests, especially with a whole bunch of people I don't know and different things like that. So over the course of that weekend, I was actually having a conversation with Jeff. And we were talking about Trump, race relations, family, different little things like that. And at that point, like, I knew that I was going to brew a beer and name it Black is Beautiful. Now, I did not know that I was going to turn it into a collaboration and it was going to become this huge initiative. Originally, I was going to brew a standalone beer, name it Black is Beautiful, release it in the tap room, and then donate some of those funds locally. Like, it wasn't meant to be anything super huge. I think it was more so for my own, like, personal need to want to contribute.
Sure, that feeling of frustration.
Yes, exactly.
And needing to do something, knowing that it's hard to have any kind of major impact, but still, despite that, just having to do something.
Yep. And so Jeff, as we were texting, I sent him the mock-up of the first label, and Jeff had responded, "Oh, like, that's a great idea." And he goes, "I would understand if you," this is exactly how the text went, "I would understand if you don't want to, but you should turn this into a collaboration." And I go, "You know what, Jeff? It's a wonderful fucking idea." So the next 24 hours, I basically try to formulate a way to come up with the mission statement and what it means for the Black is Beautiful as an initiative, right? Being in a predominantly Caucasian industry, being that my customer base is predominantly Caucasian male and mostly over the age of 50, you don't want to kind of irritate your whole customer base based off of a release. So I kind of tried to formulate a way to where it wasn't, like an attack on the industry or an attack on anybody,
right?
But was more so, hey guys, like, I know that the craft beer industry does have the ability to be inclusive. So let's show everybody how inclusive we can be. And so again, like, I originally thought it was going to be like 250 breweries, but then we hit that 24 hours in, and then I was like, oh shit, like, this is 24 hours. This is getting 24 bigger. Hours. This is getting bigger than what I imagined. And then,
and it also spoke to the kind of powerlessness that so many breweries felt, where they wanted to, you see what's happening, you want to have an effect, you don't know how to have an effect, and this is a fantastic way to be a part of a cause and try to do something.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for the majority of people, like, people always ask, like, oh, well, you think people did it for the right reasons? Now, I'm sure out of 1,200 breweries, there might have been a stray, brewery that for whatever reason they decided to brew it. But dealing with this initiative and what it's about, and even just the amount of commerce that it's moved, like, I want to believe that everybody participated within this initiative for the right reasons and the right causes. And, and
even if they didn't, the core fundamental of it is that they donate the proceeds to a cause for racial justice,
and locally at that,
and locally, so the money that's being made, raised by these beer sales is directly going to charities that are doing important work on the ground in local communities.
Exactly.
That's the difference between it and a big awareness kind of nonprofit, that the real fundamental goal of that is also, it's not just making a political statement. It is also raising funds and building donations for groups that are actually and actively, lobbying for change.
Yeah. Well, Black is Beautiful isn't really a political statement either. It's more of a humanity thing, I think, at this point. I mean, we're in 2021.
Right. It shouldn't be controversial.
Yeah, I shouldn't
right?
have to, I shouldn't have to come up with an initiative called Black is Beautiful at this point. But even being said that, the beer was kind of the initial message, but that was one of the goals, was getting these breweries involved with their local communities. You figure there's a lot of breweries that don't even know what's in their own backyard because they have their set customer base, and that's fine for them. And, there's always been the whole premise that beer isn't marketed to Black individuals or other minorities or people of color. And so this is a way for you to get into your community. This is a way for you to give back. This is a way for you to communicate with those individuals that you normally wouldn't communicate, and maybe you might even learn something. And even being said that, there was those instances where you had consumers that had certain breweries that they didn't want to participate. But what I say to that is that if somebody really wanted to take the effort to participate in Black is Beautiful, then go ahead and let them, right? Everybody makes mistakes at some point within their lives, business, or whatever the case may be. Now, I might not even still drink their beer, but who is it for me to go ahead and tell somebody that they can't participate in something that's actually giving back to the community, giving back, to their community, to the people, or whatever the case may be. And then even then, if you go ahead and sideline anybody who wants to be an ally, how many allies are you going to have left at the end of the day? And so that's kind of why I left it open for, any of the breweries that wanted to participate. I mean, you figure you had AB InBev participate in multiple avenues. I mean, you had Founders participate. Now, they sent me 2 cases of beer and I didn't try not one of them, but I'm not going to shit on Founders for participating in Black is Beautiful.
You hope that it might also help be something that helps them reflect on
some of their past transgressions. Yes. And so that was more so what that was about. And I mean, they had their literal marketing director and vice president reach out to us about their participation. So I felt like they were actually trying to make an effort in wanting to give back. Now, if it's true, only they know.
If it becomes just an effort to rehabilitate and
exactly the name that they lost, that's on them. But hey, at least I did my part into regards to that.
Sure. Now, there's got to be a downside for it in addition to the upside. I know from our perspective, having published Black is Beautiful recipe on our website, we've gotten hate mail about it, and we're just a magazine with a homebrew recipe for it. I imagine that,
luckily those emails don't go to me, they go to Kim. So my sales manager she left. That was behind us.
Yeah.
Most of those emails go to her.
Oh, good.
So
Good.
luckily, and honestly, she doesn't even send me most of them. She might say, we got a bad email, but on the other end of the spectrum, it's been way more positivity than a negative.
Right,
I think I could probably count on my hands and toes how many actual negative emails or messages that we've received. There's been some hateful ones for sure. I mean, or you even look at, we just started a national campaign with Walmart. And so Black is Beautiful is in 300 locations nationwide with 8 other breweries in collaboration. Now, off the top of my head, breweries don't get mad because I don't think I'm going to be able to.
Because we've been drinking some beers already tonight.
But Catawba, Monday Night Brewing, Revision, Three Sons, Prohibition,
Core.
Yes, and I'm missing 2. But us, and now I'm missing 1. But being said that, all these breweries were wonderful enough to go ahead, collaborate with us with releasing this beer in a national market. So even seeing large retail brands like Walmart wanting to participate in Black is Beautiful for Black History Month and wanting the beer. I mean, we've had Target reach out to us. We've had, Total Wine, Trader Joe's, all in the support of Black is Beautiful. So to even see those like large retailers and different things like that want to support, at least we know that the beer is going in the right direction, and people really, I think, do understand what the cause is about. I mean, you're always going to have those negative aspects of people that want to hate on what they don't understand, and just like, you know, they keep my politics out of beer. Well, this isn't a political issue. I mean, you know, Black people having rights, Black people having a say, Black people wanting to be equal within the community. I don't think that has anything to do with politics whatsoever. I mean, that's just basic human rights of wanting to be equal to your peers. So being said that, I mean, like, I know there was one of the stores that we tried to take up to in the outskirts of Dallas, and the manager was, I'm not taking that beer. Which is, I mean, it's the outskirts of Dallas, right? So it's understandable, but, you know, at this point, with everybody that's involved themselves, even the fact that it's transcended outside of just beer and into other service industries, I mean, you know, the negativity, it is what it is at this point.
It's taken a huge amount of your mental and time kind of capacity over the past 7 months. If you had the choice, would you do it again?
Yes, I think I would, but with more help. I think I would probably include maybe even my business partner or Kim a little bit more, just in some of the overall conversations. Like I said, I used to be a huge introvert, so it was a huge difference going from only talking to people when you wanted to, you know, oh, you have an interview at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 1:30, 2:30, 3:30. Oh, and then you have one at 7 p.m. too. It was like literally certain days it would be anywhere up to probably 10 conversations that I would have into relations of Black is Beautiful. I mean, even now, it's still probably anywhere from probably 4 to 5 interviews a week, or podcasts, or whatever the case may be. I mean, this morning we just did the local news before we filmed our episode. Before you guys got here, I had a news article, or a Zoom like thing with News 4 and San Antonio Living, where they talked about Black is Beautiful and just some of the recent accolades that we've had recently behind our beer and stuff like that. And so, you know, it is what it is at this point. You know, I would definitely do it again, especially seeing the impact that was made, the commerce that's been moved, the help that has been provided to so many different organizations and communities. I think the most fantastic part about this whole initiative has been all of the like letters and notes and stuff like that people have sent, or just some of the random emails that I've gotten, as far as just people, thank you for, you know, doing this initiative, and, you know, this said brewery donated this much money to our cause, and it, you know, helped us do this or that. Just like we have a collaboration going with Humanize Our Hoodie right now. They were one of the first like brands that reached out to us as far as the support they got from a brewery in Minneapolis. And so just to see some of that stuff, or the California Innocence Project, they had a huge amount of support, and they ended up awarding me with their Exonerator Award at the end of the year. So just to kind of see some of the changes that have actually been made by this initiative, I couldn't help but kind of continue this. I mean, even then I would have thought that, I mean, we're 7-8 months into the initiative, that it had kind of dwindled down by now, but we're still full steam ahead. And, you know, I'm still as motivated as ever to kind of continue to push this initiative and see where it goes, and how large it could become. I mean, you know, again, going in, the beer is only the message. As far as it goes, almost any service industry can get involved within Black is Beautiful. And so to be able to see that, and see some of these, different entities transition into coming up with their own Black is Beautiful stuff. I mean, we have bourbon coming out 4 years from now that's going to be associated with the Black is Beautiful recipe. And it was interesting because I was going to a distillery out here in Texas to go do a store pick, a barrel pick. And when I showed up, they were actually brewing Black is Beautiful to start distilling, and they didn't know I was coming. And it was just the fact that, wow, like, distillery is over here making the Black is Beautiful recipe, and they're going to age this for 4 years in barrels and release a bourbon. So, I mean, just to see things like that, it's amazing.
It's become something that's, you know, while it was your brainchild, it's become something bigger than you.
Exactly.
And it's an important piece of the conversation that allows people who might not otherwise engage with the subject to do it in a way that is compelling because it's also something that they respect.
Yep.
Well, I appreciate you spending this much time talking to me today.
That's no problem.
You're an incredibly busy person, Marcus Baskerville. But no, I deeply appreciate it.
No problem. We'll be back at it again tomorrow.
Fantastic. G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Crisp Scottish Pale Ale malt is the workhorse of many a brewery. Get great quality and reliable supply from Old Orchard. Take full advantage of the enhanced marketing power of Brewery DB, and check the ABS commercial Facebook page to find out how to enter to win a Keg Viking. Of course, if you'd like to support this very podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, and if you're a pro brewer, consider the new All Access Pro subscriptions that combine the magazine, exclusive online content, and more. If you are a home brewer, certainly sign up for the Craft Beer and Brewing All Access subscriptions and follow the class that Marcus right here has just recorded for us here in San Antonio, and will be up on our platform in a couple of months. Marcus, if people want to learn more about Weathered Souls, about Black is Beautiful, where do they find both of those entities?
Yeah, we are on all social media platforms, Weathered Souls Brewing Co. You can also go to our website at weathersouls.beer and obviously check out the Black is Beautiful initiative. There's an awesome little documentary video you could view kind of about the processes, to view the recipe. Consumers can sign up. Home brewers, you guys can get access to the recipe as well at blackisbeautiful.beer.
Well, again, thanks. It's been my privilege to have this conversation and talk to you about this kind of stuff.
Like I said, my home brewing, I grew up on this, so this is like a bucket list thing for me for sure.
The feeling is absolutely mutual. Cheers, Marcus.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.